My name's Jonathan Atkinson. I'd like to welcome you to the webinar today, People Powered Retrofit, a model for local retrofit markets. Also co-hosting this is Marianne. Say hello quickly.
Yeah, hello everyone, I'm Marianne. I'm an architect at Urbed and working on People Powered Retrofit with Jonathan.
And we've also got Jonty Leibowitz from CLES.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonty Leibowitz. I'm from the Centre for Local Economic Strategies based here in Manchester.
Fantastic. So yeah, welcome to today's webinar. Really grateful to Community Energy England for showcasing this as part of Community Energy Fortnight. It's also Cooperatives Fortnight as well, tend to overlap. A few kind of housekeeping things. Do use the chat to say hello, introduce yourself, where you're from, and to talk during the webinar and exchange views and meet people as we go along. We find it a really useful kind of networking tool. We will have an hour of presentation from myself, Marianne and Jonty, and then we're going to hand it over to you for questions. If you've got specific questions, use the Q&A box. And we've also got Matt on the line, who's kind of hidden, Matt from Carbon Co-op, but he's going to be fielding the chat, prioritizing questions, and when it comes on to that time, he'll be feeding them to us as well. Yeah, we'll speak for about an hour, we'll questions for half an hour, and we'll finish for 3:30. We're recording this, and the recording will be made available publicly afterwards. We'll also circulate it to people who are registered, and the slides will be available as well, so you'll have all that information. Okay, on with the presentation then. To begin with, we'll cover some of the context for retrofit and local markets. Then we'll move on to some of the specifics of People Powered Retrofit and the learning from the project, from the service. Jonty will then give his kind of perspective from a local economic development and a local authority development perspective, and then we'll come for Q&A. Oops. So to start with, what's the key question we're trying to answer with this webinar today? How do we build local markets for retrofit that operate at scale? For us, obviously, we need to kickstart a retrofit market in the UK. It's about doing it in our localities and scaling it that way. And to give you a kind of spoiler into our thinking, it's about neighbourhood scale. It's about working at a level where householders and contractors and supply chain overlap. It's about using trusted not-for-profit intermediaries as that point between supply chain and householders. It's about designing very client-focused services in a way that sometimes we haven't done before in this area. It's about being values driven, and that's about values of the organisation, but it's about the values of the householders that we're working with as well, understanding those, understanding that the decisions to procure retrofit aren't necessarily a kind of rational actor kind of cost benefit analysis, but they're values driven. And it's about a service and approach which is iterative and flexible. Do you want to add to that, Marianne?
I suppose it might be worth saying right at the start here that what we're mainly focused on here is owner-occupier householders. Mm-hmm. So people who are interested in doing works to their own homes and might have a little bit of cash to put towards that. Mm-hmm. We know that there are big issues in private renting and also, you know, across the entirety of the housing stock, but that's kind of not the focus for this.
One thing at a time. And I suppose one of the questions that lies behind this is, if we have the knowledge, the skills, the expertise, and we know how to retrofit homes, which we do very well in the UK, why haven't markets simply self-assembled? Why isn't there a viable market for this kind of thing? Why can't you walk into a store on your high street or pick up the phone and order a retrofit at the moment? And some of these, we'll be exploring those reasons in this presentation. Just a quick note on who the webinar's for. So the webinar is around markets for retrofit, how they might develop, what we could do to bring that about. It's for local authorities, city regions, policymakers, retrofit practitioners, both consultants and contractors. It's for community energy practitioners people that are running community energy groups or are members of community energy groups, and it's for academics and researchers. If you've come to this webinar today because you're interested in retrofit and you want to retrofit your home and you'd like some technical advice or knowledge, that's great, but we won't be addressing that in this webinar today. We have a number of webinars, both existing and coming up as well. Matt will be posting some links to those in the chat. But yeah, if you come here looking for technical advice, I'm sorry, we won't be offering any. We won't really be addressing it in very much detail at all. If you're here to learn about markets, fantastic, you're in the right place. So very briefly, Carbon Co-op, we're a community energy society, a community energy group, a community benefit society, not for profit, based in Greater Manchester. We've been operating for just over 10 years now. We've got 250 members in the Greater Manchester area, and we help those members make big reductions in their carbon emissions through helping them to retrofit their homes. Marianne?
Yeah, so I work at an organisation called URBED. We're a workers' co-op based in Manchester, and we're basically multidisciplinary design and research consultancy around the built environment. I'm an architect by training and have spent about the last decade really specialising in retrofit, both the technical stuff, which is not what we're talking about today really, but also thinking a lot about how you get it going, how you facilitate it, how you make it a bit less painful than it might have been for some people who've attempted it so far.
And our collaborative project is People Powered Retrofit. It's both a project, there was an R&D phase to it, and we're now delivering the service behind it. And that was part of a funded BEIS, Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy programme around creating markets for retrofit in the UK. We're also part of a number of networks and organisations and associations that we have, lots of thanks to for their support. Community Energy Fortnight I've mentioned, Cooperatives UK, we're both cooperatives, URBED and Carbon Co-op. They're a worker co-op, we're a consumer co-op. And the ACB, Association of Environmentally Conscious Building, who are a fantastic resource and network for retrofit in the UK, and we're part of that network and contribute to it. So where are you from? We have a quick poll. You'll be delighted to hear. Okay, so you should be able to see it on your screens now. You can vote for multiple things here. So you might be a householder interested in retrofit, but also a local authority bod as well, and that's totally fine. So yeah, it'd be great to get a sense of who's in the room, so to speak. Fantastic. Just a few more seconds. Great, I'm going to end it there. Sorry if you didn't get a chance to see that. So we've got a really nice representation from the number of sectors that we're all aiming at. Community energy groups, policymakers, a few practitioners, academics and researchers, householders, as I said, and also some campaigners and activists. So it's nice that we've got that mix. I think part of our kind of message here in terms of People Powered Retrofit is it takes collaborations between all these different interest groups to make a retrofit market successful. So just quickly, something about context. So where are we? How have we got here? And really, retrofit is really of the moment, and there's loads of talk about it wherever you go. Predating this year, there was the Green New Deal, the idea that we can take action on climate change as part of climate emergencies, with a huge upswelling of interest in this area, and retrofit being a way to deliver carbon savings, but also build viable markets at the same time, employment and accessibility agendas in there as well. With the COVID crisis, that's now brought about calls for build back better and thinking about how we might re-emerge and reboot our economies, but in ways that are sustainable in the long term and also benefit people and communities. And there was even a story in the Times that Marianne spotted yesterday, which was about noises from the Treasury and from BEIS to say, look, we're looking at this agenda. I suppose from our point of view, we're at one point delighted that this is top of the agenda. At the other, we're slightly fearful because we've seen some of the mistakes of the past where money was thrown out the door and the work that was done was not necessarily of the best quality. Very quickly, what is retrofit? For those that are kind of unclear, just to give us a kind of shared understanding. Energy efficiency improvements, domestic scale renewables, smart systems all kind of fall into this kind of idea. It works to existing buildings, retrospectively fitting energy improvements and things that will reduce demand as well in homes. There's a nice definition within the new PAS 2035 framework as well. Marianne, do you want to mention maybe what typifies our approach, fabric first, whole house?
Yeah, so I'd say that having a particular approach and a philosophy to this as organisations is that we should focus on the fabric first because that's what works, and that isn't just about whacking in a load of insulation. It's about understanding the building fabric and fixing things that might need fixing, like damp patches and stuff like that, before you go on and improve air tightness or add insulation. And that's really to do with viewing the house as a whole system, so that has lots of interacting parts. So that's your whole house thing. The low impact materials is, well, we try. Already by retrofitting rather than demolishing and rebuilding, you're usually having a lower environmental impact, but thinking about the materials that you do use, that they're appropriate, that they work well, and that they don't have significant environmental detrimental effects. And then the open source side of things is really that we know there's an awful lot to go at here. There's 27 million homes in the UK, if I'm remembering the figures right. There's no way that one organisation, let alone one group of individuals, could do all of it. So we're very much about sharing what we know and what we've learned from past experience, so that more people can do more of it and do it better. Because although, as Jonathan said, there are some really good examples of built retrofit projects in the UK that technically, like, we know some of the principles that work and what works well, but it's quite patchy and it's not true. There isn't like a whole industry of people ready to go doing really high quality retrofit everywhere. So we're kind of hoping to help build that, really.
Yes, sadly. And I think it's relatively uncontroversial to say that there has been a track record of failure particularly in the domestic owner-occupier retrofit side of things. We might talk about past programs like certain CES, but were relatively more successful single measure improvements. But certainly taking a whole house approach, the approach has not worked. Too often these approaches have been top down. They've been one size fits all, and they've been subject to some awful failures in terms of quality that you can see there. The Green Deal is the programme that many will remember, and that was a coalition government programme, and it crashed and burned, unfortunately. And there was an over-reliance on big organisations, the likes of Carillion, to deliver these kind of measures and improvements. Again, not appropriate for all sorts of reasons. What you'll find is in our presentation today, we'll be contrasting some of these previous approaches with our approach in a number of ways. So just to start with, we're going to think about why people even go about this kind of decision. Why do they commission home retrofit works in their homes? And we've got another poll, so let's see what you think. And then we'll share our results. So yeah, in your opinion, what are the reasons behind why people procure retrofit works, commission them in their homes? And again, with this poll, you can select more than one reason. Fantastic, really interesting. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and let's share the results. So the majority, or the vast majority of the most people think reducing energy bills is the key motivator by which why people procure retrofit. To be warmer as well, also an element of people with carbon emissions. And then we've got a number of ones that come down there. Interestingly, this is different to the results that we actually find. And this is when we talk to people and ask people who are procuring retrofit why they do so. So this I should contrast. This is why people are commissioning retrofit as opposed to why the general population might, because we know that people that are commissioning are a subset of the general population. And the reasons we find are many and various, but the main three ones are the same that you highlighted, but in the different order, almost the exact different order. So the top one that we found is reducing carbon emissions. The second one is around warmth, and the third one is around bills. But actually, we've been asking this question for many years now, and the one that is joint third is making a home climate resilient. So that's resilient to climate change impacts and severe weather events. And that's a response that we did not see 10 or even 5 years ago, and now is one of the main motivators for why people commission works. Yeah. So what are the people we're talking to here? What typifies them? Well, in the carbon corp, in the people powered retrofit approach, we're working with the willing, okay, and this is what you might say is the innovation curve for any kind of new technology or new service. At the beginning, you have innovators and then early adopters, and those are the people that are super keen to try out a new service. They're willing to put up with some of the glitches, and they know that everything might not be perfect to begin with. It's only after those early adopters have gone through the process and the process has changed and the service has adapted to meet their needs that then the early majority and then the late majority get involved, the real mass of the population. And our theory of change here is that we should be working with the innovators and the early adopters. They still make up a large chunk of the number of people, potential market out there commissioning works, but they're people more willing to make that jump and more willing to procure retrofit, and they are the people that fit into this kind of their kind of priorities or the order of what we discussed there. Do you want to comment on this, Marianne?
Yeah, I was going to say they're also happily, in a lot of cases, the people who are willing to give feedback and share their experiences. So that the people who will open up their house for an open homes event, that kind of thing. So that's a really good way of then disseminating and normalising this.
And they're more likely to proselytise to friends, neighbours, colleagues.
Yeah, there was a survey result, wasn't there, where we asked people who they talked to about retrofit, and the results were quite surprising.
Yes.
So this is people who'd done retrofit works, and the variety of people they talked to about it and the amount of time they spent. So I don't know if that will always be beneficial, but it's kind of nice to know that it's getting out there and becoming more commonly understood through those conversations.
Yeah. So people powered retrofit, what is our approach in contrast to that top-down one? It's one where we are acting as a trusted independent intermediary, giving independent advice to householders. It's locally focused, it's neighbourhood focused within the Greater Manchester area, but it's not Greater Manchester wide, it's specifically targeted within there. It's a charged service, so this is something people pay for, and it's very much a service therefore. We generate fee proposals, we carry out work, we issue invoices. It's very much a service. It's subsidy free, so we're not offering a subsidy to the householders. They're not getting free work for this. They aren't getting free bits of insulation. People are valuing this and they're purchasing the service. It's modular, so we go through a series of stages and people can come in and out of it at different stages. They don't have to start at the beginning and go all the way through. And it's harmonised with PAS 2035, which is the government standard, process-led standard around retrofit that has emerged post-Green Deal. Okay, we're going to talk through 4 or 5 of the key elements of People Powered Retrofit and just take you on a bit of a whistle-stop tour around the service, so you can see how it operates and the things we've learnt. Really, the thing I'd like to emphasize that we don't always get is the idea of mapping as being a foundational element to any kind of new service development. This is about understanding the clients that will be procuring the service and targeting resources. One of the failings I mentioned before was a one-size-fits-all approach, where it was a real scattergun approach, where it was assumed everyone was the same. There's no need to target services or to package them up for specific demographics. That has been patently shown to be kind of ineffective. So we started People Powered Retrofit in our kind of mapping phase by going through a series of open data sets and commissioning our own research and looking at householders within the Greater Manchester area. In particular, we were looking at energy use, we were looking at demographic information. And in doing this, we were also looking at the people who were commissioning retrofit, the people out there, and trying to typify their kind of behavior. This very targeted data-driven approach is quite a contrast to what you might call sort of typify as kind of supermarket style, mosaic style, quite general consumer profiling, which is quite a blunt instrument for what is a very specific and atypical service. Do you want to comment, Marianne?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things, we worked with Dr. Jamie O'Brien on this. He's a bit of a GIS whiz, and he was relatively new to retrofit and understanding retrofit, and what he helped us realise really in looking at this is that we're at such an early stage of development that there isn't necessarily a typical person who gets involved in retrofit, but there are some kind of common values and probably common attributes that they share, but those don't necessarily map onto things like the kind of socio-economic status that is part of Mosaic, because they also relate to things like the type of neighbourhood that they live in, like how it is physically. So one of the interesting findings was that a lot of the people who we knew had commissioned retrofit works were lived in identifiable communities. So that might be an inner city neighbourhood, or it might be a small village in the Peak District, but it wasn't kind of identikit suburbia type areas. There is a bit of a question as to whether that's because of the networks we work through, and that's something that we're kind of testing out as we go along, but it was really helpful in identifying for us who our clients were and why they were interested in this.
And the clients that Jamie identified, they tended not to be the richest and not the poorest in the Greater Manchester area. They tended to be slightly richer and slightly older than the people they lived around. And the areas in which they lived were better connected in sense of the transport than other areas, and had lower barriers to services. And what it builds a picture of is people that move into an area which is more traditional communities, perhaps with a high street and sets of services and well linked into other areas. And they tend to stay there rather than to move to other areas as they grow older and they grow richer. And therefore more likely to invest in their property. And they're more likely to have values that chime along the ones that we identified around people that commission retrofit. So this was really fascinating. It helped us target our work and help target our services. And this is an exercise that can be carried out in other places and typified to other locations. We also did a hell of a lot of market research. We talked to householders, to clients, to people who were commissioning retrofit and people that weren't. We ran focus groups and one-to-one interviews. We've got a lot of research here. I'm just going to highlight one element here, and this is around the budgets that people have. I think it's worth saying, often people think, oh, this is kind of slim margins, and it's also a case of people only investing in improvements that will pay back, so it's cost neutral. Actually, what we found was clients that were willing to make an investment in their property, and of quite large amounts as well, typically in the region of £30,000 to £40,000. And we even have some outliers, £250,000 plus. So the budgets that people have to work with are fairly sizable. and their reliance on grant funding and loans was pretty low. One thing is that people have access to finance in different ways, money already, and also finance is particularly cheap at the moment. So people weren't really constrained by access to finance.
Yeah, it was definitely other things that were barriers for people than finance.
And finally, we looked at personas. I'm not going to go too deeply into these. They kind of speak for themselves. But the reason that we went into this kind of idea of personas was to better understand the clients, their values, what's driving them, and their perspective, really. Because if you're designing a user-led service, you have to kind of intimately get to know the clients that you're working towards, that you're trying to design stuff for. And as we'll see as we go forward, to interact with them and to engage them in the process. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. That's been disproven. So it's about targeting them, segmenting them, understanding them, and getting to know them and their needs. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing here. Right, okay. What we're trying to do really is create trust and effectively engage and recruit clients. So it's not about just raising awareness that retrofit is a thing out there. It's about engaging, recruiting, bringing people into the service. And the approach that we've used is quite innovative. It's been utilized in health, in helping people adopt new healthy behaviors. And it's also been utilized in the US around retrofit, but never really in the UK. And this is an approach that we think is very effective. I think maybe Marianne suggested one of the best ways to kind of outline what the approach is to outline what it's not. And again, looking at Green Deal, it was a very different kind of offer, the Green Deal offer. It was very top down. It made appeals to authority to say, okay, you know, the government have mandated this, you want to get on board with it. It tried to create kind of a trusted brand, but a very kind of top-down one and a very undifferentiated one. There were also your typical adverts in magazines and newspapers, or advertorials on the left-hand side in the Daily Express. Again, it's not an approach that was very effective. And in fact, the Green Deal is not well publicised, but it got taken to the Advertising Standards Authority for some of this advertising. So very top down, treating people very similarly. And I guess what I would like to do here is like make a contrast. You know, who would you trust to sell a retrofit? Would you trust a rep that turned up on your doorstep, having travelled 200 miles that day to do a door knocking operation, or a neighbour who recommended a certain service? Would you trust a company with offshore assets and a dubious tax record, or a not-for-profit community energy group based in your locality? Would you trust a subcontractor who's working on piecemeal rates and is very poorly paid, or a local builder with an office in the same town as you? And I think in each of these cases, you can kind of see where we're coming from. Community-based social marketing, as I said, it's about creating new norms and new expectations. That thing that it's not very normal for people to retrofit their homes. How can we make it more normal? How can we encourage people to get on board? It's a neighbourhood scale, bottom-up approach, and it uses peers and trusted institutions to deliver a message rather than leaflets, rather than adverts on the back of buses and radio adverts. And fundamentally, it's about values. It's about communicating the values that you have as an organisation, a delivery entity, and the values that the householders have. It's not about necessarily a rational cost-benefit equation that people make. Right? You tell them, oh, retrofit can save you this many pounds. Okay, thanks very much, I'll do that now. It's not about information deficit. It's about broader things. It's about more subtle things. Again, another way to explain this is to show the worked example. This is the People Powered Retrofit social marketing program in Levenshulme, which is an area of South Manchester. As we said before, with a specific core to it, low barriers to services, well connected. And we've run a series of interlocking activities in this area. So we've run workshops and seminars, some of them very small, some of them a bit bigger. We've run home energy parties in people's homes, where we will come to a home, we'll do a heat camera survey, but we'll get them to invite their friends and neighbours. So we're utilising them as influencers to communicate with their local community. We've worked with trusted institutions. I think this again is where a collaboration between community energy groups and local authorities comes in. Local authorities or institutions are well trusted. We have, in this instance as well, some key community hubs. Inspire Levenshulme is a social enterprise and a community hub, and a fantastic place to host some of the work we've been doing. It's also about creating a clear brand out there, and it's approachable, and you can see the logos and the branding that we've been using. So it's many and differentiated. It's lots of different ways in. It's using people. It's using community champions and institutions to amplify the brand. There's also some social media in there as well, as a way to reach people, but it's not social media led. It kind of aids and assists that marketing message. And this has been incredibly effective. If you look at the evidence from the States, it's a lot more bang for your buck. It's a lot more effective for the money that you put in here in terms of recruiting people. And we've had loads of people come through this process, and the right type of people as well, the clients that we're looking for. Do you want to add anything, social media?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's probably worth saying that it kind of makes sense that would be the case, because when people are planning to get building work done in their home, even if it's not retrofit, often the way that they find the people to do that is by asking their friends and family and neighbours about it. So you're working through those networks. I don't know that many people who, when they're looking for a builder, just kind of look in the yellow pages. That even still exists. You know, it's tapping into those networks.
Yeah. So the mapping and the personas helps you understand who's going to be out there commissioning. The social marketing is then, with that knowledge and that understanding, reaching them using many and different ways of approaching them. There's a fantastic social marketing toolkit that's available from the States. There's a link within this presentation. But if you're interested and want to replicate this in your area, I heartily recommend it. Marianne, you're going to talk about supply chain and skills.
Yeah, and so I suppose the operative word here again is to do with the network of both contractors and consultants. I think, Jonathan, if you go on to the next slide, sorry, I don't have so we do know that the current supply chain for retrofit, the people who actually have the skills and the capacity to either design the work or to physically do the work, to actually install your insulation or do your air tightness works, it's really limited. And that is the big barrier that a lot of householders who we'd come across and who are members of Carbon Co-op over the last kind of decade or more, that was a big barrier that they hit, just finding people who knew enough about how to do the work so that it was done well, and that they could trust. We specifically chose in this programme to work with what they call RMI contractors, so that's refurbishment, maintenance and improvement. So these are all the contractors who would be your kind of relatively local, usually working within a defined area. It might be South Manchester, it might be Levenshulme, it might be slightly broader than that, depending on their particular skill set. Some specialists travel further, that kind of thing. But generally used to working one-to-one with owner-occupiers to do things like kitchen extensions or loft conversions, or just general extension and building work. So they're very familiar with the logistics of small-scale site management, which again, in contrast with some of the programs that have gone before, what had been attempted under some of the Green Deal stuff was getting really big tier one contractors, people like Carillion, to attempt to do one-off owner-occupier householder refurbishments. And it wasn't even, there was trouble there with some of the technical skills and the quality control, but there was also just a lot of problems with the logistics and the kind of client relationship and client management, because a lot of those organisations are used to doing schemes where you might have 600 houses that are all very similar, and you're doing kitchens and bathrooms, and you have a tenant liaison officer because you're working in like a social housing thing. It's a very different set of relationships where you're working with an owner-occupier, and an owner-occupier who might be in residence while you're working as well. The other advantage of this is that they tend to have local knowledge about the housing types and the conditions, so they're familiar with, you know, the type of brick that gets used in a certain neighbourhood, or the strange things like we call a Manchester window, but it's a certain type of roof light that I've only ever come across in kind of South Lancashire, and they're used to dealing with that. And also that they're locally based, and they get a lot of their work through word of mouth and reputation, and they're not going to disappear again after the work's completed. So they need to do a good job, because that's how they get their next job. They're not on frameworks, they're not working at that level. We're also, alongside that, building links with architects and engineers and advisors and specialists, many of whom are kind of sole practitioners or sole traders or run micro businesses. Because I think something that has often happened in retrofit programs is you maybe get your Green Deal assessment or your EPC, and then you jump to expecting a contractor to install things. And some contractors have the skills to be able to do that and to do the detailed design work, but a lot don't, and especially a lot of those who are used to working on smaller scale works, they might need some support and advice and design development from someone like an architect or an engineer or an M&E designer, that kind of thing. And these two things are reinforcing as well. So an architect might speak to a client, find that they want a certain amount of work done, and then source contractors, but contractors also go back the other way as well. And it's really important to build these networks and to build trust within the supply chain as well. So it's not just about householder trust, it's about trust in the supply chain that this is good work that people can be doing, because retrofit is often seen, and actually often is, quite complicated and can be quite risky, technically risky. And so if you're able to just happily earn a living doing something else, you might want an easier life, and that might be what you choose to do. So it takes a little bit of extra support to kind of get contractors involved and people involved in this. And to do that, you also need to demonstrate demand. So it's about having clients who actually want to commission the work as well. So that's why we were talking about developing demand and supply alongside each other. What we've recognised as well is that this is all about, a lot of this is investing in existing skills. We're not starting completely from scratch. So someone who is trained as a plasterer can learn how to render an external wall insulation system. Someone who's trained as a joiner can learn air tightness. There are transferable skills in all of this. And it's definitely not about telling people that they've been doing it completely wrong and they need to be reskilled and isn't it awful. It's about working with people from where they are to help them develop their skills, really. It's also, as with householders, not all contractors are the same. So contractors work at different scales. They have maybe a maximum or a minimum size of job that they might do. They have various specialisms. So it's about putting the contractors together with the householders who need that particular set of skills, and doing that through building a community of practice and expertise and peer learning and mentoring opportunities, which I think a lot of people really value, because especially being a sole trader or a small organisation, it can sometimes be a bit isolating. So having other people you can talk to about the work you're doing or a problem that you've come across, I think a lot of people really appreciate that. We want to support both business growth, so existing organisations that want to kind of grow and gain in scale and maybe start doing bigger jobs or more jobs. And also there's a lot of people who are new entrants to this field, so people who might be retraining as builders, having worked as DJs in the past, for example. I know at least one of those. And it's about providing the entire infrastructure around this, so dedicated training, on-site support, quality assurance, referencing past 2035, but recognising that some of the official certifications and paperwork involved in that at the moment could be quite intimidating for smaller contractors, so kind of supporting them to align with that where possible. We have also been exploring links to local and regional skills strategies and thinking about planning and building control. I could do a whole other session on planning and building control, but basically it's about trying to make everyone's life easier, because at the moment, if planning authorities continue to kind of treat every retrofit or external wall insulation or air source heat pump application as a kind of one-off thing and put it all through the process, we're not going to be able to scale up. And a lot of householders and contractors find that it's quite a big barrier as well. So it's how we can scale up while maintaining the quality. I think, yeah, the big lessons are about engaging in and respecting existing supply chain expertise. So, you know, someone who's been working as a joiner or a plasterer on sites for 20 years, they know a lot, and we should value that and build on it. Engaging in and respecting those existing RMI networks, so that the networks of contractors, there'll be quite often smaller firms there might be a general builder, but they have a plumbing company that they often work with, or an electrician that they often work with. So it's kind of tapping into and respecting those networks. A really big and important thing is that training needs to be practical. And I think this is true both for contractors and builders, but also for professionals, that a lot of us learn from experience and case studies. It's quite hard to learn from a checklist. Not that checklists aren't important when it comes to QA, but it's especially in something in retrofit where you're often having to adapt to uncovered circumstances. Having that kind of really hands-on learning is very helpful. And as I said before, people seem to really value the peer learning and the support. Just able to have a conversation with other people working in this field. And the really important thing is we can't, because this is kind of a little bit what happened with the Green Deal, we can't tell people who run small construction firms or design businesses, train up in all this, there's loads of work, and then there'd be no demand, or there'd be demand that doesn't fit the training and the skills that they've learned. So we need to develop demand from good clients alongside this, so that the people in the supply chain can be doing good work and feel comfortable to invest in their skills. Yeah, that's my rant nearly over. And yeah, I suppose just a final point that the supply chain and the construction industry is quite complicated. It's something I've worked in for 20 years, so I kind of feel like I know it a bit, but there are still things that sometimes surprise me. From the point of view of a householder, it is bamboozling. So there's a really big issue about how we support householders to navigate their way through all of this, and help them avoid making the big mistakes, make the journey maybe smoother and a bit faster. Recognizing all the time that they are actually, in this instance that we're talking about, owner-occupiers commissioning works, whether it's savings that they're spending or whether they're borrowing, ultimately it's their money, and they're the key decision maker. So they need to kind of understand enough to be able to navigate all of this.
And that brings us on to service design. So given all this knowledge, understanding, the training and the engagement with contractors, the key kind of element to People Powered Retrofit is the service. And this is creating an end-to-end service that helps clients achieve retrofit works. But from any starting point, it might just be, I'm interested, I don't know anything about it, or it might be like, I know what I want, and I'd like to help you to get me there. So again, typifying designing services, how has past services been designed? Well, too often by economists or politicians who are too eager to don hard hats and build walls, which may or may not stand up. Politicians that have engaged large players that, as Marianne said, are not necessarily ideal for delivering this kind of work, but saw it as a potential area they might get into, or perhaps a source of subsidy. And yeah, I love that. I love this graph that I found about broccoli. Some of the kind of mechanistic, economic, rational, so to speak, arguments that people find about if we offer bricks at this price, this number of people will buy them. Which basically all these ways, these top-down ways of involving designing services that don't involve clients at any stage have been proven to be ineffective. Our service design process, and service design is an emerging discipline that involves multiple different stakeholders coming together to build services for clients. And I think the thing to highlight here is it's all around client-led services, user-led services. For this project, we did a hell of a lot of research. We did a lot of talking to householders, a lot of probing and understanding what their needs and wants and desires were, where along the retrofit process they were stuck. So many have started and become stuck along the way. We also went to Ireland and to Scotland and did a lot of desk-based research into the KFW process in Germany, the stuff in the United States that we were talking about, stuff in France as well. And there's quite a lot out there. There are interesting small scale and larger scale examples of viable retrofit markets that are operating around the world. And we put these things together, a lot of post-it notes, a lot of design, a lot of thinking, a lot of taking things apart. The service is very complicated. I'm not going to go through it all, but this shows you the level of detail that we've gone into, the thinking about every stage as people progress. But in very broad terms, there are 5 stages to the process. It begins with advice, retrofit advice, using a retrofit advisor. And what you'll notice, some of these job terms, these are taken from PAS 2035. So these are recognizable skill sets that you can go out and recruit, or you can offer training to existing staff members or new people. So retrofit advisors offering advice, and as much as possible, that stage is free. So we're taking people in, understanding what their requirements are and saying, yes, this is for you, no, it's not for you. The next stage is around making a plan. And we have our own My Home Energy Planner retrofit assessment that gives people understanding of where they're at the moment and costed sets of scenarios, groups of measures that they could procure and where that would take them in terms of energy and comfort and such. After people understand what they want to do, it's about design development. This is a retrofit coordinator, and this is a new and emerging job role, which is a fantastic for taking people from ideas to delivery and having an on-site role as well. Design development may involve more testing and investigation, structural engineer, it might be air pressure test, or M&E engineer to do heat loss calculations for a heat pump. And we've also got architectural support from Marianne, her expertise, and other consultants that we bring in. At the end of design, it's about procurement. And we're helping householders to procure contractors using our networks and using our best practice expertise. As Matt kind of said during the R&D, procuring a retrofit contractor is something you may only do once in a lifetime. So it's not something people are proficient in. If we're offering this service to people, we can help them find the right people. Then on site, it's about retrofit coordination. That might be in the form of contractor training, specialist toolbox talks, the bits of skills and skill sets that might be missing, and about using QA framework, quality assurance framework, again taken from PAS 2035. So we've got a good framework there within which to work. And after that, it's about handover and evaluation and understanding how effective the service has been. The job roles here, as I said, a number of these come from PAS 2035. The ones in blue are the staff members that we employ as part of this process. We have a service manager, Liam, and we have retrofit advisor as well, who's just coming on board with the team. In terms of coordinators and assessors, we have one coordinator. Liam also performs that role, but we also bring in coordinators on a freelance basis, and we do the same with assessors as well. And there is a crossover between assessors and coordinators. We also work with architects, engineers, contractors, and again, they're procured, so they're external. So work with them and building the network, but we're not employing them directly. And the red roles at the top, those are the ones for this program. We have a technical lead, Marianne's playing that role. I'm managing the program. We also have ICT development going on in the background, and we have a training manager as well. So you need all these different roles to create the service. Some of them are employed, some of them are freelancers that you're bringing in. What we're finding is increasingly there are these people playing these job roles. So there are these skills and expertise out there to bring on to create this viable market. In the background, as I said, we have our own ICT services. To begin with, we looked to kind of bring in bits of tools and services, but we found that they weren't bespoke enough. They didn't really work for the service that we're offering because it's so new and it's so specific. So we've built our own. We're lucky enough to have software engineers working at Carbon Co-op. So we've built out our own service, customer relationship management software. And we're also starting to bring in, through some of the other work we're doing at Carbon Co-op, bring in smart meter data on a half-hourly basis, both historic and current. So this is fantastic for baselining people and evaluating works. So that's the service design, and that's what it looks like. In terms of real-world experience, we did the R&D for a year, and now we're 6 months into delivery, and we're approaching 50 clients within the service. These are all people paying for works, paying for our services. Most are at the assessment and design stage, a couple have completed, and a number are on site with more to follow. We've done a lot of research and evaluation. Clients are happy to pay the fees. We've not had a problem with charging. It's not been a kind of like, this should be free, why am I paying for this? And that comes back to the service design and making sure it's quality services that people want. The evaluation is showing high levels of trust with the clients and the service and ourselves, and good levels of satisfaction as well. Home visits are starting again after COVID. We've done a lot of work on risk assessing it and making sure it can be run in a safe way. And again, there's been a lot of demand from householders, and there's been no discernible drop-off so far. That may well change, but at the moment, there isn't a drop-off in demand. And the thing to emphasize here is we're iteratively and ongoing developing this service as we go along, feeding back, clients feeding back their experiences and us making changes. Do you want to make any points here, Marianne?
Well, I suppose just talking about the evaluation stuff, I think that the organisation that we're working with on evaluation short work had a bit of a time of it to do evaluation, because we changed so much in the first 6 months just from learning. And I wouldn't want to give the impression that we have a completely polished, here you go, do this service, but we've learned a lot, so we want to share that, and we will continue to learn and develop it.
Cool. Yes, it's exciting times, and it's really good to take something that's theoretical and test it with real people. And the research and the feedback we've got from the clients is just more valuable than the 6 months we spent doing R&D. Okay, that's our kind of roundup of the service. We're going to talk about some lessons, but we're also going to perspective on a community wealth building aspects. And I'm going to stop sharing and allow Jonty to share your screen.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to share the screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right then. Well, thanks very much, Jonathan. So hi everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Jonty Leibowitz. I'm a senior researcher at CLES, Centre for Local Economic Strategies. And I noted Jonathan's comment earlier on that economists are too eager to don the hard hat and take over. I certainly agree with that. And the goal here is not to do that, to not be, I see people sometimes talk about the trend of PPE graduates wearing PPE and going around doing construction projects. That's not the goal here. But instead, what I just wanted to talk about for a few minutes is sort of what we as CLES see as the real incredible economic potential and power of retrofit, and provide a bit of perspective on that. Because we think this is a really central piece of work that's important for local economic development, not just from the perspective of energy and the climate emergency, but actually is really at the heart of creating a good local economy, particularly post-COVID. So I'll just start with a little bit about CLES. Some of you might have heard of us. We're a think and do tank based in Manchester, and we work with local authorities and devolved administrations predominantly in all 4 nations of the UK, And our abiding argument for a long time now, but now more so than ever, is that the way we develop local economies needs a step change. Local economic development in the UK, as many of you will know, has been based around securing inward investment for local economies in high growth sectors, with the hope that that will trickle down through property development and financialisation, and improve the GDP and GVA of local economies. Many of us have known for a long time, but as I said, now more than ever, that approach to local economic development is failing to produce a good local economy for the majority of ordinary people. And so we at CLES work on strategies to try and shift local economic development away from that model and towards a model that focuses more on developing the well-being and inclusion for local people, and does so in a way that local people, businesses and individuals can take democratic ownership of their assets, of the firms that they work for, can develop social infrastructure, and can try and create a local economy that keeps wealth circulating in the local area, rather than being extracted out, as it is under financialization. So CLES does this mainly through a program of work that we call community wealth building. Again, some of you might have heard that. It's been around in the UK now broadly for 10 years. And the idea very simply behind community wealth building is to try and use the role of local authorities, but also of anchor institutions in local economies, so your schools, hospitals, your big players in the public and commercial economy, to try and shift that economic development away from an extractive economy towards a generative economy where... Yeah.
Jonty, apologising for interrupting, but would it be possible to make your slides full screen? Because I think it'd just be a bit easier for people to read them.
Absolutely. Is that better?
There should be a present option in the top right-hand corner, but I think that's it. Brilliant.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cool.
So, under community wealth building, we work in places like Preston, with the Welsh Government, with North Ayrshire up in Scotland, and with a number of localities across the UK, to use a series of techniques to try and get the spend of anchor institutions to build a more generative and democratic local economy. And I'll just give one quick example of how this approach works. For example, progressive procurement of goods and services. So we work with local authorities to try and get them to use their public spending to develop the local cooperative and social enterprise economy, rather than just spending procurement money with Carillions and Capitas and those sorts of firms. So you can see, hopefully it's clear, that this People Powered Retrofit project is community wealth building in action, and that there's a strong economic development potential here in the way that we do retrofit. And there's a number of reasons for the sort of economic benefits of this, which many of you will know, but we saw in the slides, the depth of green jobs that can be created here is really impressive. I saw a report from the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group last week that we could have 150,000 jobs to 2030 across the UK in these sorts of roles, not just in retrofit. And there's a huge economic potential there, because all of our places across the UK, especially after COVID, are going to need new jobs in new sectors. There's business opportunities for local SMEs, particularly in construction, that we've talked about. There's a reduction in household energy costs. I'm sure that many of you will have seen the refreshed report from the Marmot Review that came out early in 2020, and it said, as it did in 2010, that fuel poverty is still a huge issue in this country, and that's a way of addressing that. And then on these last 2 points, community development and building a democratic energy economy, what's really exciting about this work is that it's not just trying to do mild tweaks with the energy system, as arguably the Green Deal did, but it's actually trying to democratize the products underneath it and try and build the resources of local communities themselves. So we see People Powered Retrofit as community wealth building in action, and we see it as the basis for what could be post-COVID green recovery strategies in local economies across the country. Just a brief comment on the sort of economics of this very quickly. one of the things that struck me in listening to this presentation is that the People Powered Retrofit program is all the more impressive because it's currently taking place in what I like to call infertile soil, by which I mean it's a flower that's growing, but it's not being helped by the soil conditions of national economic and regional economic policy. It's sort of done it in spite of many of the barriers there. There are real issues in the current policy landscape about the planning system, about the lack of financial support, and this crucial issue of it's very hard to raise supply and demand at the same time. So I'm sure Jonathan and Marianne can talk about this, but in order to get the investment in reskilling, you need to be able to evidence that there's demand. In order to evidence the increase in demand, you need to show that there's enough people to do the work. So that balance between supply and demand. So what we at CLES think, and what many others think, is that what we really need is a proper national economic strategy to advance retrofit, to scale up at pace, to increase supply and demand at the same time, to empower the experts, and that goes back to, I think, Jonathan's very fair point that we don't want government coming in and just taking this over again. And then also to think about how we can expand this into other areas of housing, so in social housing in the private rented sector, and take the lessons from here and extend it to all housing across the UK. And then again, as has already been discussed today, I think we need to learn from past mistakes. What strikes me about the Green Deal is that the government basically saw an economic opportunity in the retrofit sector and decided to go in for it and flush it with cash, but without really committing to reforming the extractive practices at the heart of the energy sector in the UK. So reform is going to need to empower the experts and upscale this work, but it is also going to need to reform some of the sort of underlying problems in the UK energy and home market. So in terms of thinking about what policy can we implement to create the right soil conditions to make sure that we can have more people-powered retrofits across the country, there are two categories to look at. The first is local and combined authorities. I know there's a number of you here today from there. And then I'll talk about national government in a minute. For local and combined authorities, our sort of view at CLES is we want to see local and combined authorities adopting community wealth building principles to now advance the retrofit sector. And what we mean by that is pulling every lever that's possible to the local state and to local councils in order to try and advance retrofit in a way that treats it not just as a climate priority, but as an economic development priority. And you can see from the list on the screen, there's a number of things that local authorities and anchor institutions to do. So on procurement, for example, opening up construction projects to SMEs and small-scale construction firms that could do this sort of work, and leading by example, so using the direct procurement spend of anchor institutions to try and commission some of these services in a way of increasing demand. On the supply side, we need to start looking at retrofit apprenticeships, on-the-job training programs. Here in Greater Manchester, for example, a lot of skills policy is devolved. It's not in Whitehall, it's here with Andy Burnham in Manchester. How can you make retrofit apprenticeships a key part of that? On business support, local authorities do still have business support remits. It's been cut a lot by austerity in the last 10 years, but they're still there. So how can local authorities try and work with their local chambers of commerce, for example, to try and animate new forms of supply in the local economy, whether that's bringing together contractors into new cooperatives or it's linked to skills, as I said, ways to develop new forms of business to meet levels of supply are important. Planning is also important, and I'm sure there are many of you here with more expertise than myself on sort of what we do around planning. And then financing models is also really important. There's a number of financing models to look at there, which many of you will be familiar with again. And then lastly, just to say on sort of national government policy, what we need is retrofit as a national industrial strategy priority, because by doing that, we'll unlock a bunch of funding and resource that currently flows from industrial strategy down in this country that can really begin to try and shake things up for this sector. And what we really need is a sector deal for retrofit to animate new forms of supply, to look at planning and all of these other bits and pieces. So I think that's about it from me. It's just really to sum up with these 3 points, to say that people-powered retrofit is community wealth building in action. It's a economic development priority rather than just a climate priority. It's actually both. It should be at the heart of green recovery strategies for regional and local economic policymakers. And in terms of that list of recommendations for local and combined authorities, CLES and Carbon Co-op and URBED are now in conversation to try and develop basically a list of policy asks for local authorities to implement this at an economic development level. So looking forward to a discussion, and please get in touch with myself, get in touch with CLES, because we, the economists, we don't want to don the hard hats and take this over, but we do want to boost it with support so that we can have the right soil conditions to develop this work. And that's about it for me. Thanks very much for your time, everyone.
Fantastic. I should have said, just like all householders are different, all economists are different, and they're different. There are better and the worse. And yeah, thanks for that, Jonty. And I think it's really useful to place this work in a wider context. Really briefly, I'm going to talk about replication. There was quite a lot of discussion on the chat. You know, how do we replicate this elsewhere? How do we achieve scale? And not less the stuff that Jonty's been talking about, you know, wider policy approach as well, and creating the soil conditions. I'll talk about some ways that people-powered retrofit can be replicated, or the lessons can be replicated as well. And for us, it's about learning, sharing that learning with others, and contributing to a growing network of practice. Hopefully you can see my screen, yeah? Yeah, good. So replication, I think very simply, good ideas grow. On the left-hand side, you can see the cooperative founding fathers, and they are all fathers, I'm afraid, back in the 1840s. And a very simple idea built on mutual support and mutual benefit, collectivism, cooperativism, was able to replicate and very quickly spread all over. And in the context of the 1840s, it was around access to good food and around drink and clean, healthy products. Today, it's around energy, access to energy justice, energy equality. On the right-hand side, you can see the good and the bad. Things like McDonald's, it's a franchise. It's a thing that works well in one area and is replicated elsewhere. It's not a big organization that decides to open branches everywhere. It literally is a replicable model. And on the bottom right-hand side is Linux. Linux is an open source platform. And again, it's open, it's replicable, it's present in thousands of our everyday applications that we use, from cloud servers to mobile phones. So we think good ideas grow from the bottom up. People-powered retrofit is a modular approach, and bits of people-powered retrofit can be replicated, and that's what we're in the process of doing at the moment. Engaging in knowledge sharing activities with local authorities and with community energy groups around replication pilots as well. And that can be done for elements such as My Home Energy Planner, can be replicated. It's an open source package. We provide training and expertise, or all in one. And the People-Powered Retrofit manual documents and codifies everything that we've been doing. There are training packages for us to train up people in their localities. It's not about us creating new things elsewhere. It's about us supporting other groups, local authorities and entities, not-for-profit social enterprises to do similar. And we have the back-end tools and systems as well available, the bespoke packages that aren't necessarily available to all. And those are in development as we speak. And fundamentally, it's about creating a growing network of support and practice all around the UK. People with similar values, similar approach, that are taking on board this approach and delivering it in their area. Some very quick lessons, and then we're over to the Q&A. We've gone on maybe 10 minutes over, so we'll extend the webinar for 10 minutes. Hopefully people can stay. If not, we'll record everything. For building a retrofit market in your area, the lessons, one size does not fit all. It's not a sort of thing where, you know, it's a model, we don't need to think about it, just deliver it. It's about local conditions, local people, the audiences in your area. It's about building mechanisms for trust right at the start, trust and independence throughout all this research That's what's really crucial here, and that's what failed within the Green Deal and other approaches. It's about being client focused at all times. Too often we think about our projects, our priorities. We need to do this for the good of the environment. What are the motivations of the clients? What are the needs of the clients, and why are they engaging in this? Mapping and research as a way to understand your market, understand the conditions, understand the particularities of where you are. Testing and piloting, starting small but starting. Too often people they're a bit worried about starting out and too worried about getting it wrong. Just get out there and get doing things, and don't worry too much. It's better that there is a presence there and things are happening, and it can be small and you can learn, but do start. And being iterative and flexible and learning and evolving, and not having a kind of, this is our approach, I'm not going to change it. Another thing here is about building technical expertise and capacity. And our big message, especially to the community energy sector, is build in-house expertise. By outsourcing, you're just reliant on the whims and the priorities of other partners. We need to build professionalism within the sector, capacity, knowledge. The more expertise you have in-house, the more you can do to revolutionize the energy sector. And if we look into in Europe, we see community energy taking on board a lot more technical services. And part of that is getting trading as soon as possible. This is a paid-for service. People need to value it. It's not a kind of cost-neutral payback. It's something people should value. It's their homes. It's a service to be valued. And finally, be open and collaborative. We are, and we encourage others to be as well. And for as much as possible, for us to learn and transform together this country's energy systems to be more citizen-owned, citizen-led. Do you want to add anything, Marianne, while you swig your tea?
I don't think so. I think the point, because there's been a bit of discussion in the chat as well about how you scale this up, and I think really we just have to start. I've been involved in quite a lot of both community energy stuff, but also community-led housing stuff, and you start by starting and just getting on with it. And maybe don't worry that the thing that you're doing at that time is going to be the thing that solves it for the whole country, but at least you're heading in the right kind of direction, and you're learning, and you're building this kind of network and of people who are, so you will be building skills and expertise in doing that.
And what I would say is on that, community energy groups, small localized groups, have many thousands of members collectively. The Green Deal was a program designed for scale, for millions, and it in fact delivered to thousands. So that's the way to reach scale, is multiple small projects working to a similar kind of approach that can all build scale in their local area and collectively can target millions. The way not to build scale is to build a massive national program that works for everyone and actually works for no one. Right. Okay. More information here. Do check out our links. We've got reports and My Home Energy Planner. We're now going to move over to the Q&A. Matt, are you on the line?